The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the law enforcement depot. Dust swirled across the cracked asphalt as a few motorcycles revved their engines, creating a deep rumble that echoed through the empty streets. It was a typical Thursday evening in a small, quiet town on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. But for the men on those motorcycles, nothing was typical. They were part of the Iron Wolves, a notorious biker gang known for their illegal dealings, extortion rackets, and brutal enforcement. Led by the cold-eyed, tattooed man named Marcus Grim Rourke, the gang had been a thorn in the side of law enforcement for years. They dealt in everything from stolen firearms to human trafficking, and they operated with impunity, moving through towns like a storm, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. Tonight, however, they had made a mistake. They had come to the law enforcement depot. It wasn't the place to pick a fight. In fact, it was the one place where you didn't mess with anyone unless you had a death wish. The depot wasn't just any warehouse full of evidence and vehicles. It was a storage facility that housed tactical gear, confiscated firearms, and unmarked police vehicles, including armored trucks and SWAT gear. And more importantly, it was managed by someone who had seen more combat than any of these bikers had ever dreamed of. His name was Lucas Steelers. Lucas Steele wasn't your average lawman. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a force of nature. Born and raised in rural Montana, Lucas enlisted in the military straight out of high school. By the time he left the service, he had been decorated with numerous awards, including the Silver Star and a Purple Heart. His military career was marked by numerous covert operations, and his training was both unorthodox and highly effective. But after his service, Lucas felt the sting of disillusionment. He left the army not out of fear, but because his sense of duty had become a lonely and burdensome thing. He took a job at the law enforcement depot, hoping to find some peace in a quieter life. It was a far cry from the battlefields, but it gave him a sense of purpose, making sure the weapons, the armor, and the technology that law enforcement used were always kept safe from those who would abuse them, and he was damn good at it. It was late when the Iron Wolves rode into the depot's parking lot. The first few bikers were loud and arrogant, revving their engines as they skidded to a stop. Lucas, who had been inspecting a few pieces of confiscated military-grade gear, heard the noise from the inside of the building. He straightened up, his muscles rippling under the tactical vest he wore. He stepped out of the main office and walked toward the front door of the depot. The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, followed by the screeching of tires against the cracked asphalt. The men dismounted, casting a quick, intimidating look around the parking lot. They were all large men, clad in leather jackets with the Iron Wolves insignia on the back. At the front of the group was Marcus Grim Rourke, the leader of the gang. He wore a weathered black jacket with a skull emblazoned on the back, and a scowl etched permanently across his face. He looked at the depot with disdain. "You sure this is the place, Grim?" one of the bikers asked, eyeing the barren lot. "Shut up," Grim barked. "We're here for one reason, to take what's ours." They had come for something specific, an old military-grade sniper rifle that had been confiscated in a bust a few weeks ago. The Iron Wolves had a buyer lined up, and they needed it badly. They thought they could just waltz in, intimidate a few staff, and leave with the rifle. They had no idea who was waiting inside. Lucas watched them from the shadows, his eyes narrowing. He didn't get involved in things unless they got personal. But tonight? Tonight was different. These men had stepped into his world. They weren't just messing with law enforcement. They were messing with the wrong soldier. Grim motioned to one of his men, who reached into a leather bag and pulled out a crowbar. With a grunt, the man slammed it into the door, bending it open with a quick jerk. It was a simple move, but it was enough to send a message. They were here, and they were taking what they wanted. The door creaked open, and Lucas stepped out into the moonlight, his boots clicking against the pavement. The bikers froze for a moment, not expecting resistance, but quickly recovered. Grim smirked, his cold eyes locking on Lucas. "Well, well," Grim said, his voice a low growl. "I didn't expect this. What do we have here? Another rent-a-cop trying to play hero?" Lucas didn't flinch. He just stood there, sizing up the group. "You're in the wrong place," he said, his voice calm but laced with a quiet menace. Grim's smirk faltered for just a second. "Is that so?" he said, looking Lucas up and down. "You think you're gonna stop us? We outnumber you, old man. Just step aside and let us do our business." Lucas' hand instinctively went to the holster at his side, but he didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he reached for the radio on his shoulder, transmitting a simple message, code red. "All units, locked down." The sound of the depot's heavy metal doors sliding shut echoed across the parking lot, the noise cutting through the night like a knife. The bikers paused, their eyes darting nervously. Grim scowled. "You think locking us in is gonna stop us?" Grim barked. "We'll burn this place to the ground first." Lucas didn't respond. He simply walked toward the nearest bike, grabbed the handlebar, and yanked it off the ground. The biker who owned the motorcycle let out a sharp yell as the bike was tossed aside like a child's toy dot. "You not taking anything tonight," Lucas said, his voice hard as stone. His gaze moved from one biker to the next. "And I'm the one making sure of that." The tension in the air was thick. It was a standoff, and Lucas knew how this would play out. The bikers had the numbers, but they didn't have the experience. They didn't have the years of training that Lucas had. They didn't have the skills to survive a fight with someone who had fought wars, who had trained to handle situations like this with efficiency and precision. Grim snarled and pulled out a knife, the steel glinting in the moonlight. "We'll carve you up, soldier," he spat. Lucas didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. In a flash. He moved. His left hand grabbed Grim's wrist, twisting it until the knife fell to the ground. Before Grim could react, Lucas delivered a sharp elbow to his face, sending him stumbling backward. The other bikers hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. Lucas didn't give them time to think. He moved in, knocking another biker to the ground with a well-placed punch. The remaining bikers surged forward, but Lucas was a blur of motion. He was everywhere at once, striking with precision, using his body to absorb their attacks and turn their aggression against them. One by one, the bikers fell, their faces bloodied and bruised, their weapons scattered on the ground. Lucas barely broke a sweat. Grim, still reeling from the initial attack, struggled to his feet. His eyes were filled with fury, but also a grudging respect. He lunged at Lucas with a wild swing, but Lucas was ready. He sidestepped, grabbing Grim's arm and flipping him onto the ground with a swift, calculated move. "You are done," Lucas said, pinning Grim's arm to the asphalt. "This is your last mistake." Grim let out a primal growl, but he knew the fight was over. His men were out of the game, and he was pinned beneath a man who had spent his life learning how to survive. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, but Lucas didn't need to wait for backup. He already had the situation under control. By the time the local law enforcement arrived, the Iron Wolves were subdued and waiting in cuffs, their motorcycles left abandoned in the lot. Lucas stood alone, watching as the officers hauled the gang members into the back of a squad car. The entire incident had lasted no more than 20 minutes, but it would be talked about for years. Lucas didn't stick around for the accolades. He'd done his job, and he didn't need the recognition. He turned, heading back into the depot to finish what he had started earlier. In his world, there were no medals, no parades, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done his duty. The Iron Wolves had messed with the wrong soldier, and now they'd pay the price.